and practical course that takes you from zero to hero, this is the right Next.js course for you. You don't need any prior knowledge of Next.js to get started. Everything you need is right here, so you won't need to jump back and forth between random tutorials. But here's the catch. Unlike other courses, we're not just building a dummy app. We'll be building a beautiful, full-stack, production-grade app for tracking issues. An app complete with all the features and UI patterns you would expect in modern applications. On the homepage, we have this beautiful dashboard that displays the latest issues and their status. And all of this data is stored in a MySQL database. We can go to the issues page, we can filter issues, sort them, and go to different pages. We can click on an issue to see more details. We can assign an issue to a user. So here we have full authentication and authorization. We can edit an issue. And here we have this beautiful markdown editor. We can also delete an issue. And here we get this confirmation dialog box. We'll be building this application using a cutting-edge stack. Next.js 13, Tailwind, Radix UI, Prisma, React Query, React Hook Forms, Zod, and more. And don't worry if some of these tools are alien to you. Just like my other courses, I will walk you through each one, explaining the what, the why, and the how. So if you follow along, you will master Next.js and will be able to build full-stack applications with confidence. I'm Mosh Hamadani, a software engineer with over 20 years of experience, and I've taught millions how to code and become professional software engineers through my YouTube channel and online school, codewithmosh.com. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe as I upload new videos all the time. Now, let's jump in and get started. All right, so what exactly do you need to know to take this course? Well, to take this course, you don't need any prior knowledge of Next.js because I'm going to teach you everything from the ground up. However, you need to have basic familiarity with React and TypeScript because Next.js is a React framework, and if you don't know React, you are not really the right student for this course. Now, if you want to learn React, I have a great tutorial on my YouTube channel. The link is below this video. I also have a comprehensive course that goes way beyond that. It teaches you everything you need to know to build modern applications with React 18 and TypeScript. The full course is 14 hours divided into 2 parts, so you can easily finish each part. In this course, you will learn how to build this beautiful app in real applications. Interested? Welcome back to our Next.js course. In this section, we'll be talking about the fundamentals of Next.js. First, I will explain what exactly Next.js is and why is it so popular. Shortly after, we'll set up our development environment and create our first Next.js project. From there, we'll talk about some foundational concepts such as client and server components, data fetching, caching, as well as static and dynamic rendering. This section is a great introduction to Next.js, so let's jump in and get started. So you might be wondering, what is this Next.js thing everyone is talking about and why should I bother with it? Well, Next.js is an incredibly powerful framework for building fast and search engine friendly applications. It's built on top of React, so everything you have learned about React is still relevant. But Next.js takes web development to the next level. While React is just a library for creating interactive user interfaces, Next.js is a comprehensive framework. Think of a framework as a collection of libraries, tools, and conventions that streamline application development. For instance, Next.js includes its own routing library, so we don't need to use a separate library like React Router. In terms of tooling, it comes with a compiler for transforming and minifying our JavaScript code, a command line interface for building and starting our application, and a Node.js runtime. Now, you might wonder, what exactly is a Node.js runtime? Well, there are 2 main ways we can execute JavaScript code: within a web browser on the client side, or within a Node.js runtime on the server. So a Node.js runtime is just a fancy term for a program that can execute JavaScript code. So Next.js comes with a Node.js runtime, and this allows us to do some really cool things. The first thing is that we can do full stack development. So we can write both the front-end and back-end code within the same Next.js project. the backend code gets executed within the Node.js runtime, and the frontend code gets bundled and sent to the client for execution within a web browser. In contrast, when building applications with React, we have to maintain a separate backend project in a potentially different programming language. This Node.js runtime also allows us to render our components on the server and send their content to the client. This technique is called server-side rendering, or SSR, and can make our applications faster and more search engine friendly. We'll talk about it in detail later in the course. But wait, there's more. With Next.js, we can pre-render certain pages and components that have static data when we build our application. We just render them once and serve them whenever they are needed. This technique is called static site generation and can make our applications super fast. So in a nutshell, Next.js is a framework for building super fast and search engine friendly applications. All right, now let's talk about setting up our development environment. To run Next.js, you should have Node version 16.8 or higher. So head over to nodejs.org and download the latest version. Now in this course, I'll be using VS Code as my editor, just like my other courses. You're welcome to use your preferred editor, but I encourage you to use VS Code because along the way, I'll be sharing a lot of tips and techniques for writing code fast. So you can get VS Code from code.visualstudio.com. Now, here in VS Code window, let's talk about the extensions I'm going to use in this course. So in this panel, search for ES7. All right, look at this extension, ES7 plus React. Redux, and React Native. This extension gives us a bunch of code snippets so we can quickly and easily generate React components. The next extension is TypeScript. It's this one here, JavaScript and TypeScript nightly. And the last one is Tailwind CSS IntelliSense. Now, if you have never worked with Tailwind before, don't worry, it's super easy, and I'm going to hold your hands through the entire course. All right, to create our first Next.js project, open up a terminal window and run npx create-next-app. You can use the latest version, but in this course, I'm going to use version 13.4. So I strongly recommend you to use the same version so you don't have any difficulties going through the course. Let's go ahead. Now it's asking if you want to install this package, Create Next App version 13.4.13. Let's proceed. All right. Now it's going to ask us a bunch of questions about our new project. The first question is the name of our project. I'm going to use next-app. The next question is if you want to use TypeScript in this project. The default answer is yes, so let's press enter to accept it. The next question is about using ESLint, which is a common code analysis tool that we can use to find common errors like syntax errors, formatting issues, and so on. Again, we're going to accept the default value, which is yes. The next question is about using Tailwind CSS. One more time, we're going to accept yes. The next question is about using the source directory. A lot of Next.js projects don't use the source directory, so I'm going to select no here. The next question is about using the new app router. I'm going to talk about this later in this section, but very briefly, in Next.js 13, we have two types of routers. We have the new app router and the legacy pages router. In this course, we're going to use the new app router. So let's select yes. The last question is about customizing the default import alias. We're going to select no. All right, now it's going to install all these dependencies. So you see we have React, React DOM, Next, TypeScript, and so on. All right, all of our dependencies are installed. So now let's go into this folder and run npm run dev. This starts at development server on port 3000. So let's control and click on this link. And this confirms that our first Next.js project is up and running. Let's talk about the key files and folders in this project. So at the top, we have the app folder, or this is also called the app router. This is the container for our routing system. So in Next.js, our router is based on the file system. So unlike React Router, we don't have to configure our routes and map them to our components. We can simply create files and folders to represent our routes. We'll talk about them in the next lesson. So in the app folder, we have a favorite icon. We have our global CSS file, a layout file, which is a basic React component that returns an HTML and body element. This represents the common layout for our pages. Now, inside the body element, we have children, which is replaced by a page dynamically at runtime, depending on where the user is in our application. Now, in this folder, we also have a page file, page.tsx. This represents our home page. Now, for this demo, let's delete everything here and replace it with a simple markup. So we're going to return a main element. Inside main, we want to add an h1 and say hello world. Now back to the browser. Here we have fast refresh. So anytime we make any changes to our TypeScript or CSS files, the changes are reflected immediately. Now here we have a bit of styling issue because there is a gradient, a linear gradient applied to the body element. So let's go to our global CSS file. Down the bottom, look at the styles applied to the body element. The background attribute is set to a linear gradient, and that is why we have this weird style here. So simply remove the background attribute and the issue goes away. Beautiful. Now I want to apply a padding here so the content is not so close to the edges of the screen. So let's set padding to 1 rem. Okay, that is better. So we're done with the app folder. Now in this project, after the app folder, we have the public folder. This is where we can put our public assets like images. In this case, we have 2 SVG files here, which are vector graphics. One is Next, the other is Vercel, which is the company that has created Next.js. Now, in the root, we have a bunch of configuration files. We have one for ESLint, another for Next, PostCSS, Tailwind, and TypeScript. For the most part, we don't have to touch these configuration files, but if the situation changes in the future, we'll come back and revisit them. All right, I told you that routing in Next.js is based on the file system. So here in the app folder, we can create a new folder called users. Now to make this publicly accessible, here we should add a page file in this folder. So page dot, now the extension can be JS, JSX, or TSX for TypeScript. In this course, we use TypeScript, so I'm going to go with TSX. Now make sure to name this file correctly, page in lowercase, because this is one of the conventions that Next.js looks for. So the routing system in Next.js is based on convention, not configuration, okay? So here we have a page file. Now in this page file, we should export a React component that will be rendered when the user is at this location, /users. Earlier, we installed a very useful extension in VS Code. With that extension, we can generate a React component using this shortcut, RAFCE. That is short for React Arrow Function Component with an export. Now, the way I remember this is RAFCE, okay? So let's generate it, beautiful. Now here we have multiple cursors activated, so we can rename this component to something more meaningful like users page. The name we assign here, it doesn't really matter in terms of routing. This is just for better organization of our code, okay? Now let's press escape to deactivate multiple cursors. So back to the browser. Now let's go to /users, and here's our new users page, beautiful. Now, one thing you need to know about this routing system is that if we add any other files in this folder, let's say test.css, this file is not going to be accessible. So if we go to /users/test.css, look, we get this not found page. So this is how the new app router is different from the old Pages router. In the Pages router, if we put any files in these folders, those files would be publicly accessible. But this is not the case with the new router, okay? So let's delete this file. Now here we can also create nested routes. So inside the users folder, we can add a new folder called new. And in this folder, we add a new page file. So page.tsx. One more time, let's create a React component. And we're going to call this new user page. Good. So now we can go to users/new and see this new page. Beautiful. Now let's talk about navigation. So we're going to go back to our home page. So here we press Command and P on Mac or Control and P on Windows to look up files by their name. If we type page, we can see all our page files. So the first item is our home page. This is the one we're looking for. Now, on this page, let's add an anchor. So here we add an anchor. We set href to /users and give it a label like users. Now, there is a problem with this way of implementing navigation. Let me show you. So let's go back to our home page. All right. Now I'm going to open up DevTools. Here in the Network tab, look at all the requests sent to the server. The first one is our HTML document. The second one is a font. The third one is a CSS file. And after that, we have a bunch of JavaScript files. Now I'm going to clear this list. Look what happens when we click on the users link. Let's go back to the Network tab. Look, all these resources are re-downloaded. This is not the optimal way to implement navigation because in a real application, we probably have a navigation bar on the top, a side panel on the left. So as the user navigates from one page to another, we don't want to reload all these repetitive parts. We only want to replace the content area, right? This is where we use the link component in Next.js. So back to our code. We're going to replace this anchor with a link component that is defined in next/link library. Okay, let's replace it here as well. Good. Now, back to our homepage. Once again, I'm going to bring up the Network tab and clear this list. Now look what happens when we click on the user's link. Look, we only have 2 requests, and these requests are for downloading the content of the user's page. So we are not re-downloading a font, a CSS file, and a bunch of JavaScript files. This is what we call client-side navigation. Now, there's more to navigation. We have a comprehensive section about this topic later in the course. This was just a basic overview. In Next.js projects, we have 2 environments where we can render our components and generate HTML markup, either on the client within a web browser or on the server within a Node.js runtime. Rendering components on the client is similar to how React applications work. We refer to this technique as client-side rendering or CSR. On the flip side, we have server-side rendering or SSR, where components are rendered on the server. So what are the differences? Well, with client-side rendering, we have to bundle all our components and send them to the client for rendering. This means as our application grows, so does our bundle size because it must contain all of our components. Now, the larger the bundle, the more memory we need on the client to load all these components. So this approach is resource heavy. The other problem is that search engine bots, which are machines that browse and index our websites, can't view our content because they can't execute JavaScript code, so they cannot render our components like a web browser. And last but not least, any sensitive data we have in our components or their dependencies, like API keys, will be exposed to the client. Now, if we render our components on the server, we can get rid of all these problems. We only send the essential components to the client and prevent our bundle from becoming unnecessarily large. Also, because the server handles most of the rendering, we need less resources on the client. Plus, because rendering is done on the server and we send the actual content to the client, search engine bots can view and index our pages. And finally, we can keep sensitive data like API keys on the server. So these are all the great benefits of server-side rendering. However, with server-side rendering, we lose interactivity. So server components, which are components that are rendered on the server, cannot listen to browser events like click, change, submit, and so on. They cannot access browser APIs like the local storage. They cannot maintain state or use effects. These functionalities are only available in client components. So in real-world applications, we often use a mixture of server and client components. We should default to server components and use client components only when we absolutely need them. Here is an example. Let's imagine we want to build a page to show a list of products. To build this page, we probably need several components like navbar, sidebar, product list, product card, pagination, and footer. Now, in standard React applications, we have to package all these components and send them to the client for rendering. But in Next.js, we can keep all these components on the server and minimize the bundle size. There is just one exception. To add a product to a shopping cart, we need to handle the click event of a button. Typically, we implement this functionality in the product cart component, so we have to make it a client component. That's one option, but there's a better way. We can keep this component on the server and do most of the rendering there, and instead extract a small component that only contains the add button. With this change, we only ship that tiny component to the client and keep everything else on the server. Let's see this in action. Back to our project. In Next.js, all components inside the app folder are server components by default. So that means all the pages we have created so far, these are server components and are rendered on the server. Let me show you. So back to the browser. Let's bring up the network tab and look at the first request. This is the HTML document that we get from the backend. So look, we have our content here, we have our hello world and the user's link. This is exactly what search engine bots see when they browse our website. In contrast, if we used client-side rendering, which is how standard React applications work, search engine bots wouldn't be able to see our content. They would see a blank page because all components, all the content is rendered on the client. Okay? So back to our project. All components inside the app folder are server components by default. Now, if you have worked with Next.js before, I should mention that the pages router doesn't support server components. So going forward, you should stop using it and switch to the new app router. Okay. Now let's create a new folder here called components. Earlier, I told you that this folder is not publicly accessible unless we add a page file inside it. So that means we can co-locate our project files like our components and other building blocks with our pages. We can put them next to each other, and this is perfectly fine. So here in the components folder, let's add a new file called product.card.tsx. Here we create a basic React component. Now, earlier I told you that server components cannot have interactivity. So they cannot handle browser events like click, change, and so on. So that means if we add a button here and handle the click event, we get a runtime error. Let me show you. So let's pass a basic arrow function and log something on the console. And we set the label to add to cart. Now let's add this component to our home page. So we go to our first page file and add our new product card component. Now back to the browser. Look, we got an error saying event handlers cannot be passed to client component props. If you need interactivity, consider converting part of this to a client component. Now here we have two options. One option is to make this entire component a client component. So we go to the top and use the client directive. So in quotes, we type use client. That's all we have to do. With this, we tell the Next.js compiler to include this file or this component in our JavaScript bundle.